February 28, 1942, at Camp Elliott in San Diego, California, Major James Jones held his pencil suspended over a sheet of paper, observing an occurrence that defied everything he knew about military cryptography. 4 Navajo men stood before him, transmitting battlefield messages within just 20 seconds, a feat that would take standard encryption machines up to half an hour. The words emanating from the radio were incomprehensible to Jones. They sounded like nothing he had ever encountered. Yet these 4 newly recruited individuals from Los Angeles flawlessly decoded each message without any errors or delays. Major Jones, with 2 decades of experience in military communications under his belt, was well versed in codes and ciphers. He understood the critical importance of securing communication lines during warfare and knew that Japan had already demonstrated its ability to break every American code system then in use. The Marines were at a significant disadvantage in the cryptographic arena even before engaging in battles across the Pacific. However, what he witnessed that morning would alter the course of history. Ultimately, 420 Navajo Marines would develop an unbreakable code, one that would become the sole impregnable system in modern military history. This code was so secure that Japan's intelligence chief would later confess they never managed to decipher it. Yet this narrative does not begin with 1942, but rather 24 years earlier in October 1918. During the Meuse-Argonne offensive in France, 8 Choctaw soldiers serving alongside the American Expeditionary Force were placed on telephone duty. They communicated exclusively in their native language. The Germans, who had previously intercepted and decoded every message transmitted by the Americans, suddenly ceased their eavesdropping activities. They managed to intercept the transmissions but couldn't comprehend even a single word. The Choctaw language is part of the Muskogean linguistic family, unique to North America, and no German cryptographer had ever encountered it before. During the final months of World War I, 8 Choctaw Code Talkers provided American forces with a significant edge, yet this achievement was largely forgotten by military leaders after the war ended. The program concluded when hostilities ceased. On December 7, 1941, however, Pearl Harbor exposed a terrifying reality regarding American military communications. The Japanese were deciphering American codes almost as quickly as they could be transmitted. Japanese intelligence had meticulously prepared for this conflict over several years, and their cryptographers had successfully cracked multiple code systems, including the Gray Code and Brown Code. By early 1942, the situation was dire. The Japanese were not only intercepting American radio messages, but also breaking codes within hours, sometimes minutes. Furthermore, they employed their English language proficiency to sow confusion by broadcasting fake orders that set up ambushes for unsuspecting American troops. Major Howard Connor, who would later lead Code Talkers at Iwo Jima, described the predicament succinctly. Every code and cipher we devised was compromised, and our mechanical devices were equally vulnerable. Existing American encryption methods proved both weak and inefficient. The M94 cipher machine required 30 minutes to encode a 3-line message and another 30 minutes for decoding on the receiving end. In the rapidly evolving battles of the Pacific Theater, such delays frequently had fatal consequences. In stepped Philip Johnston, born in Topeka, Kansas in 1892, who was not of Navajo heritage himself. His parents were missionaries who relocated to the Navajo reservation in Arizona when he was just 4 years old. Growing up among the Navajo people, Johnston learned their language and immersed himself in their culture. By the age of 9, he had become fluent enough in Navajo to serve as an interpreter for a delegation traveling to Washington to advocate for tribal rights. In his teenage years, Johnston joined the ranks of only about 30 non-native individuals worldwide capable of speaking Navajo with proficiency. During World War I, Johnston enlisted and later returned to Los Angeles, where he worked as an engineer for the city's water department. By December 1941, at age 49, Philip Johnston was established in his career, living far from the reservation where he had spent his childhood. However, a newspaper article in February 1942 changed everything when it described Army training exercises featuring Native American soldiers using their tribal languages for communication. Johnston grasped an idea that few others could comprehend. The Navajo language was nearly impossible for outsiders to learn due to its complexity and unique characteristics. As part of the Abascan language family, Navajo lacks an alphabet and did not have a written form until missionaries developed one in the 1920s. The language's meaning is heavily influenced by tonal qualities, where pitch and emphasis can change the interpretation of sounds. Its syntax bears no resemblance to English or any other European or Asian languages. Johnston knew that during the 1920s and 30s, German and Japanese scholars had studied various Native American tribes but never delved into Navajo culture due to its isolation on the reservation. The language proved too challenging. The very next day after reading the article, Johnston visited the Naval Office in Los Angeles. There, he shared his innovative concept with them, employing Navajo speakers as radio operators and having them communicate using their native tongue. Given that the Japanese had no familiarity with the language, breaking any messages transmitted this way would be virtually impossible for them. With just 2 weeks to prepare a demonstration, Johnston managed to recruit 4 volunteer Navajo speakers from Los Angeles. On February 27, 1942, he and his team made their way to Camp Elliott. The following day at 1900 hours, Major Jones and Major General Clayton Vogel convened in the communications room along with a number of skeptical staff officers who were anticipating that the demonstration would fall short of expectations. Johnston positioned 2 of his Navajo volunteers in separate rooms 50 yards apart and connected them via field telephone. He then handed one pair an English messenger, enemy expected to make tank and dive bomber attack at dawn. The first volunteer read out the message, relayed it over the phone in Navajo, and the second volunteer transcribed it back into English almost verbatim as enemy tank dive bomber expected to attack this morning. Within 30 minutes, machine translation could have been accomplished using captured code books. However, Major Vogel promptly penned a letter to the Marine Corps commandant urging the recruitment of 200 Navajo men without delay. This correspondence was dated March 6, 1942. The core group then authorized an initial pilot program involving 30 recruits from the Navajo tribe. If successful, plans were to scale up further. On May 4, 1942, a bus left Fort Defiance in Anna carrying 29 Navajo men destined for Fort Wingate, New Mexico, and eventually Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego. These individuals would later be known as the Original 29. After completing 7 weeks of rigorous Marine Corps boot camp, Platoon 3082 graduated on June 27, 1942. They were then dispatched to Camp Elliott for specialized training. Their mission was groundbreaking and unique. The task at hand was to develop a military code utilizing their native language, which proved daunting due to the absence of specific Navajo words for modern military concepts such as tanks, submarines, artillery, and battalions. However, the solution was ingenious. The Code Talkers devised 2 distinct types of coding systems. The first type involved an alphabetic coding method where Navajo words were assigned to each letter of the English alphabet. However, rather than using a single word per letter, multiple alternatives were employed to thwart frequency analysis. For instance, the letter A could be denoted by wuol, meaning ant, basana, a signifying apple, or znil indicating axe. This approach made it difficult for Japanese codebreakers to use statistical methods to decipher the messages. The second type involved a direct substitution of military terms with Navajo words. For example, submarine was translated as bashlo, meaning iron fish, battleship became lotso, or whale fighter plane was referred to as dahetihi, which means hummingbird, and bomber was designated as jay-sho, translating to buzzard. The Code Talkers categorized ships and aircraft based on their attributes. Ships were called fish because they navigated through water, while aircraft were termed birds due to their ability to fly in the air. This classification system made logical sense within the Navajo language but would be confusing for non-speakers. Initially, the original code consisted of 200 terms. Within a few months, it had expanded to include 411 military vocabulary words. Combining this extensive list with the Type 1 alphabetic substitution method resulted in an incredibly deep and adaptable communication system. All terms needed to be memorized during training, and nothing was documented in the field once operations commenced. By August 1942, the initial group of 29 code talkers had completed their training. They developed an operational military code based on the Navajo language, allowing for swift encoding, transmission, and decoding of messages that astonished their instructors. Starting in late 1942, the first group of code talkers joined combat units, with their initial deployment to the 1st Marine Division during the Battle of Guadalcanal on August 7, 1942. Upon arrival at the combat zone, the Navajo Code Talkers immediately began working. Within a few hours, they were communicating sensitive battlefield information through open radio channels in their native tongue. This capability astonished Marine commanders because messages that once took an hour to encode and decode now zipped across the airwaves in mere seconds. Artillery coordinates, enemy positions, troop movements, all transmitted instantly without being deciphered. Operating under harsh conditions on the Solomon Islands, working tirelessly around the clock through oppressive heat and humidity. The code talkers maintained flawless accuracy in their communications from foxholes, command posts, and forward observation points. However, they encountered unexpected challenges beyond direct combat threats. Some American Marines unfamiliar with Navajo mistakenly identified the code talkers as Japanese infiltrators due to the distinctive guttural sounds and rapid speech patterns that bore no resemblance to English. Several instances of code talkers being detained at gunpoint by fellow Marines who suspected them of being enemy soldiers were reported. To address this issue, each code talker was assigned a bodyguard task, with SAF guarding them from both enemy attacks and friendly fire incidents. The Japanese response to the Navajo transmissions further highlighted how effective the code truly was. Japanese radio operators meticulously documented every transmission they received. These recordings were then forwarded to specialized cryptographic units for detailed analysis. The findings left them utterly perplexed. Despite cracking nearly all American military codes, Japanese intelligence faced an unprecedented challenge. They relied on thousands of highly skilled cryptographers and possessed virtually unlimited resources. However, the Navajo transmissions remained incomprehensible no matter what techniques they employed. They attempted frequency analysis, a conventional method for deciphering substitution ciphers, but found that each letter was represented by multiple substitutes, rendering this approach ineffective. When comparing message contents to detect recurring phrases, it became evident that the Navajo Code Talkers intentionally varied their transmissions. Linguistic analysis was also tried, with language experts brought in from across the board, yet none could identify or comprehend the sounds. The language used seemed entirely foreign and unfamiliar, leading Japanese intelligence to dub these enigmatic transmissions incomprehensible. One report even suggested that the sounds resembled those produced by a mechanical speech synthesizer, implying they were unnatural. By late 1942, Japanese commanders began receiving warnings from their intelligence services indicating that the Americans had devised an unbreakable code for tactical communications. All efforts to crack the encryption were unsuccessful. During the intense three-day Battle of Tarawa in November 1943, code talkers successfully transmitted and received over 800 messages without any errors. Despite Japanese forces intercepting numerous transmissions, they failed to extract any useful intelligence from them. In September 1944 at Peleliu, code talkers managed all communications during the amphibious assault for an extended period of 73 days, enduring some of the harshest conditions encountered in the Pacific theater. The ultimate test came on February 19, 1945, with the massive amphibious invasion of Iwo Jima. 6 Navajo Code Talkers worked non-stop during the initial 2 days of combat, transmitting over 800 messages without a single mistake. Each message was encoded in Navajo and decoded instantly with perfect accuracy. Major Howard Connor's after-action report succinctly summarized their critical role. Without the Navajos, we would never have taken Iwo Jima. Throughout the war, Japanese cryptographers relentlessly attempted to decipher the code, even as their empire crumbled. They dedicated considerable resources to cracking it. A telling incident occurred in April 1942 at Bataan when a Navajo-speaking soldier named Joe Kiumia was captured. Although fluent in his native language and part of the Navajo tribe, Kiumia was not a code talker. This episode underscored both the determination of Japanese intelligence efforts and the robustness of the Navajo encryption system. He had no formal training in deciphering the code. Japanese intelligence officers escorted Kiumia to a communications room where they played recordings of Navajo Code Talkers. They demanded that he translate them. Kiumia listened intently but was unable to make sense of the messages despite recognizing some words. He heard terms such as wachi, meaning ant, and baslo, meaning iron fish, yet when strung together, they did not form coherent sentences. Unbeknownst to Kiumia, these were actually code words of Alachi, stood for the letter A, while Biso signified submarine. Without specific training in the encryption method, even a highly proficient Navajo speaker could not decode the messages. He truthfully informed his captors that although he recognized the language as Navajo, the content was incomprehensible. The Japanese interrogators were unconvinced and subjected him to extreme torture. They stripped him naked and made him stand in deep snow until his feet froze to the ground. This episode highlighted the effectiveness of the code system. A fluent Navajo speaker who had not undergone code training would be unable to decipher it. Following the war, Lieutenant General Ta'arisu, Japan's top intelligence officer, confirmed what many had long suspected. Japanese cryptographers managed to crack numerous American codes during the conflict, but never succeeded in breaking the Marine Corps code. They were completely stumped by it. By the time the war concluded, around 400 Navajo men had served as code talkers. 13 of them lost their lives in combat. These individuals worked alongside all 6 Marine divisions, making invaluable contributions to the units. Despite their significant service, when they returned home in 1945 and 1946, there were no parades or public accolades for the code talkers. They were instructed to keep their work confidential. The program itself remained classified until 1968. This prolonged classification had far-reaching consequences. It meant that the code talkers could not discuss their experiences openly with anyone outside their community. Even after the declassification in 1968, public acknowledgement of their efforts was slow to materialize. The code talkers themselves rarely talked about their wartime service, and many struggled with what today would be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD). However, recognition gradually grew over time. In 1982, President Ronald Reagan designated August 14th as National Navajo Code Talkers Day, and in 2001, President George W. Bush awarded gold medals to the 4 surviving members of the original group of 29 code talkers. President Bush's comments highlighted the importance of this accomplishment. We remember a tale that every American can take pride in and should be aware of. This story revolves around indigenous peoples who were called upon to serve in a contemporary conflict despite their ancient heritage. It tells of an unbreakable oral code used during World War II, which became legendary for its effectiveness. Above all else, it is the narrative of young Navajo individuals who brought distinction to their nation and triumph to their country. The irony faced by these code talkers was profound. Many had been disciplined at government boarding schools for speaking their native language. Policies aimed at eradicating Native American cultures and languages were widespread during that era. Yet, when World War II erupted, the United States urgently required those very languages. Despite the earlier prohibitions against using Navajo in educational settings, these individuals volunteered to employ it as a means of communication. This dedication exemplified an extraordinary sense of patriotism that transcended historical grievances. Upon their return home after the war, many encountered significant obstacles when trying to access veteran benefits. The reservation systems were ill-equipped to facilitate programs like the GI Bill, which greatly benefited white veterans in post-war America. However, their contributions dramatically transformed American military communications. The success of the Navajo Code Talkers demonstrated that linguistic security could rival technological advancements in safeguarding information. Their story has become a potent emblem of Native American patriotism. Throughout centuries marked by broken treaties and forced relocations, along with enduring discrimination, indigenous peoples have consistently served in every American war at higher rates than any other ethnic group. Chester Nez, one of the original 29 Code Talkers, passed away on June 4, age 93. While it is challenging to quantify their exact impact mathematically, there is no denying its profound significance in military history and communications technology. Over 3 years of combat, tens of thousands of error-free messages were transmitted. Communication speeds improved from 30 minutes to just 20 seconds. This system provided flawless security against an enemy adept at cracking virtually all other American codes. At Iwo Jima alone, 6 Code Talkers working during the initial 48 hours conveyed information crucial for the survival of thousands of Marines. The success of the Code Talkers highlighted a significant aspect of human intelligence and cultural knowledge. Even the most advanced cryptographic machines of that era couldn't match the security offered by natural language and memory. The legacy of the Code Talkers extends beyond their contributions during World War II. They altered how America perceives its indigenous populations, showing that Native American languages and cultures are assets rather than liabilities. Today, fewer than 200,000 people speak Navajo, with the language facing significant challenges. Nevertheless, the Code Talkers' legacy has inspired efforts to preserve and teach the Navajo language. These individuals transformed their language from what was once seen as a liability in American society into one of its most valuable military assets. The Code Talkers demonstrated that indigenous knowledge immense power and reinforced the notion that diversity strengthens rather than weakens national defense. They left Japanese cryptographers bewildered, giving American forces a crucial edge. Countless lives were saved due to their efforts, which ultimately contributed to winning the war. All of this was achieved by speaking their native language, which proved to be unbreakable when it mattered most for their nation's survival.